The dust rose in choking clouds as the stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the last trading post before the lawless territories. Inside, pressed against worn leather seats that smelled of tobacco and fear, Sarah Mitchell clutched her carpetbag with white-knuckled desperation. At 23 years old, she had already buried one husband, fled from another man's unwanted advances, and now found herself racing toward an uncertain future with nothing but $42 sewn into her petticoat and a heart that had learned to build walls higher than any frontier stockade. The Arizona Territory in 1878 was no place for a woman alone, and Sarah knew this with the kind of bone-deep certainty that comes from listening to whispered warnings in boarding house kitchens and reading the fear in other women's eyes. She had left St. Louis 3 weeks ago, answering an advertisement for a seamstress position in a mining town called Copper Ridge, but the letter in her bag, the one she'd read so many times the creases had worn soft as cloth, had been deliberately vague about the details. Now, as she stepped down from the coach into the blinding afternoon sun, she felt the full weight of her recklessness settle around her shoulders like an ill-fitting shawl. The trading post was little more than a weathered building leaning stubbornly against the wind, its porch crowded with men who stopped their conversations to stare with the kind of hungry assessment that made Sarah's skin crawl. She kept her eyes down, focusing on the uneven boards beneath her boots, but she could feel their gazes tracking her movement like wolves watching a stray lamb wander from the flock. Her dark blue traveling dress was dusty from the journey, and tendrils of auburn hair had escaped from her practical bun, but she still looked too refined, too out of place in this rough country where women were scarce as summer rain and twice as precious. Inside the trading post, the proprietor, a thick-necked man with suspicious eyes, looked her up and down before speaking. His voice had the texture of gravel rolling in a tin can. "You the seamstress woman heading to Copper Ridge?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer and didn't much care for it. "I am," Sarah replied, forcing steadiness into her voice that she didn't feel in her trembling hands. "I was told there would be a wagon waiting to take me the rest of the way." The man's laugh was short and bitter. "Copper Ridge burned 3 weeks back. Mine collapsed, killed 17 men, and the rest scattered like chaff in the wind. Ain't no town there no more, miss. Just ashes and bad memories." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and leaving her swaying on her feet. She reached for the counter to steady herself, her mind racing through impossible calculations. She had $23 left after paying for the stagecoach fare. Not enough to return to St. Louis, not enough to reach California, barely enough to survive a week in this godforsaken territory. Behind her, she heard the trading post door open and close, felt the presence of men entering, heard their boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Well now," one of them said, his voice oily with false friendliness, "looks like we got ourselves a lady in distress. Name's Derek Walsh, miss, and I'd be happy to offer you employment at my establishment back in Red Canyon. Always need pretty girls who can sew and such." Sarah didn't need to turn around to know what kind of establishment he meant. She'd heard enough stories, seen enough haunted faces of women trapped in saloons and brothels throughout her journey west. Her throat tightened with fear, but she forced herself to stand straight, to meet the proprietor's eyes with as much dignity as she could muster. "Thank you, but I'll find my own way," she said quietly. Walsh moved closer, and she could smell the whiskey on his breath, feel the threat radiating from his substantial frame like heat from a stove. "Now, don't be hasty, darling. Woman alone out here, with no money and no prospects? That's a dangerous situation. I'm offering you protection, regular meals, a roof over your head. All you gotta do is be friendly to my customers and do what you're told." Sarah's hand instinctively went to the small pocket knife hidden in her dress, but she knew it would be useless against men like Walsh and the 2 companions who had positioned themselves to block the door. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in, just as they had when her stepfather's business partner had cornered her in the pantry, just as they had when her husband's gambling debts had brought dangerous men to their doorstep in the middle of the night. The lady said no, a new voice cut through the tension like a blade through butter, and every head in the room turned toward the far corner where a man rose from a table near the window. Sarah hadn't noticed him before. He had that quality of stillness that made him seem part of the furniture until he chose to move, but now she couldn't look away. He was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of hard years under an unforgiving sun. His eyes were the color of winter sky, pale blue and sharp as broken glass, and they fixed on Walsh with an intensity that made the larger man take an involuntary step backward. He wore dusty range clothes and a gun belt slung low on his hips, and when he moved, it was with the economical grace of a predator who never wasted energy on unnecessary motion. "This ain't your concern, Slate," Walsh growled, recovering some of his bravado, though his hand had moved closer to his own weapon. "Just offering the lady honest work." "Honest as a $3 bill, the man called Slate replied, his voice carrying a hint of something that might have been dark humor if the situation weren't so dangerous. "You peddle misery and call it opportunity, Walsh." "Always have." He shifted his attention to Sarah, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, if you're looking for legitimate employment and safe passage, I can offer both. I run a ranch about 30 miles northwest of here, and my sister's been begging me to find someone to help with the household work and maybe teach her proper sewing. The work's hard, but it's honest, and nobody will lay a hand on you without answering to me." Sarah's mind raced. She knew nothing about this man except that he had the kind of reputation that made Walsh hesitate, which could mean he was dangerous or decent or possibly both. But she also knew with absolute certainty that if she walked out that door with Walsh, her life would become a living nightmare from which there might be no escape. She'd heard too many stories of women who disappeared into the shadows of saloons and mining camps, their spirits broken long before their bodies gave out. The silence stretched taut as a rope between the men, and Sarah realized that whatever she said next would determine the course of her entire future. She thought of her mother's advice, whispered on a deathbed 8 years ago, "Trust your instincts, Sarah girl. When you're backed against a wall, sometimes you have to choose the lesser darkness and pray there's light on the other side." She took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and looked directly at the man called Slate. His eyes held hers, not with the possessive hunger of Walsh's gaze, but with something else, something that might have been understanding or might have been pity. Either way, it was better than the alternative. "I accept your offer, Mr. Slate," she said, her voice carrying more clearly than she'd expected. "When do we leave?" A slow smile touched Slate's weathered face, not reaching his eyes but softening the hard lines around his mouth. "Soon as you're ready, ma'am. I've got supplies to gather, but we can be on the trail within the hour." Walsh's face darkened with rage, and his hand dropped fully to his gun. "You're making a mistake, Slate. That's a fine piece of property you're stealing from me." "She's not property," Slate said, and now there was steel in his voice, cold and absolute. "And if you reach for that gun, I'll put you down before you clear leather. We both know I'm faster, Walsh. Don't make me prove it in front of witnesses." For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could see the muscle jumping in Walsh's jaw as he calculated his odds and found them wanting. Finally, he spat on the floor and turned toward the door, his companions following like cur dogs slinking after their master. "You'll regret this, Slate," Walsh called over his shoulder. "Both of you." When the door slammed shut behind them, Sarah felt her knees go weak, and she grasped the counter again for support. Slate moved toward her, not too close, respecting her space even in her moment of vulnerability. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She wanted to say thank you, wanted to ask 1,000 questions about what she'd just agreed to, wanted to know if she'd traded one form of danger for another. Instead, she whispered the truth that had been burning in her chest since the moment she'd stepped off that stagecoach: "I'll do anything for protection. I have nowhere else to go." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with desperation and surrender, and Sarah hated how weak they made her sound, how utterly defeated. But Slate's response surprised her. He didn't smile with triumph or let satisfaction show in his eyes. Instead, he looked at her with something that might have been sadness, and when he spoke, his words weren't what she expected at all. "You don't have to do anything, miss, except keep your word about honest work. I'm not Walsh. I don't collect broken people and use them up. What I'm offering is exactly what I said: employment, safe passage, and a chance to start over. Nothing more, nothing less. Your life is your own, and it stays that way." Sarah stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception, for the trap she was certain must be hidden in such unexpected kindness. But his eyes held steady, patient under her scrutiny, and she found herself wanting to believe him with an intensity that frightened her almost as much as Walsh had. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you help me?" Slate was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window where the dust still hung in the air from Walsh's departure. When he looked back at her, there was something old and wounded in his expression, some private pain he carried like a scar beneath his skin. "Because someone helped my sister once when she needed it most, and I wasn't there to protect her. Because this territory's hard enough without men like Walsh making it worse. Because it's the right thing to do, and right things are in short supply out here." He picked up his hat from the table and settled it on his head, then gestured toward the door. "We should get moving before Walsh works up his courage again. You have belongings?" Sarah thought of her single carpetbag, holding everything she owned in the world: 2 spare dresses, a sewing kit inherited from her mother, a daguerreotype of parents she barely remembered, and the tattered remains of dreams she'd once carried from Boston to St. Louis to this desperate frontier. "Just my bag," she said. The driver set it outside. As she followed Slate into the afternoon sun, Sarah felt the weight of 100 eyes watching from the shadows of the trading post porch. The men who'd been there when she arrived still lingered, their faces hard and speculative, and she knew her choice would be the subject of speculation and gossip in every rough establishment from here to the Mexican border. But she kept her head high and her step steady, even as fear and uncertainty churned in her stomach like bad whiskey. Slate's horse was a rangy gray gelding with intelligent eyes, and he had a pack mule loaded with supplies tied beside it. He helped Sarah secure her carpetbag, his movements efficient and impersonal, never lingering or taking liberties as her husband used to do. Then he surprised her by producing a second horse from behind the trading post, a smaller bay mare with a gentle eye and patient stance. "Figured you'd need your own mount," he said simply, holding the reins while she approached. "Her name's Button. She's steady and won't spook easy. You know how to ride?" Sarah nodded, grateful that at least this was something she knew how to do. Her father had taught her before he died, back when she was still young enough to believe the world held more promise than threat. She accepted Slate's help mounting, hyper-aware of his hands on her waist, strong but careful, lifting her weight as if she were made of something fragile, and then they were moving, leaving the trading post and its shadows behind. They rode in silence for the first hour, the landscape opening before them in vast stretches of golden grass and red rock, the mountains rising blue and distant on the horizon. The afternoon sun beat down with relentless intensity, and Sarah felt sweat gathering beneath her collar, dust coating her throat with each breath. But she didn't complain. Complaining was a luxury she'd learned to surrender years ago, along with expectations of comfort or fairness or any of the other pleasant fictions she'd once believed in. It was Slate who finally broke the silence, his voice carrying easily over the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. "You got family back east?" "No one who'd claim me," Sarah replied, surprised by her own honesty. Usually she kept such truths locked away, but something about the vast emptiness of the landscape made confessions easier, as if words could blow away like tumbleweeds and leave no trace behind. "My mother died when I was 15. My father before that. I married young to escape a stepfather who drank too much and noticed me in ways a father shouldn't. My husband was killed in a factory accident after 2 years, and his family blamed me for the debts he'd accumulated. I've been running ever since, taking whatever work I could find, staying one step ahead of trouble." Slate was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. "That why you answered the advertisement for Copper Ridge? Running from something specific?" Sarah hesitated, then decided there was no point in lies. If she was going to trust this man with her safety, he deserved some measure of truth. There was a man in St. Louis. A merchant with money and influence. He decided I would make a suitable mistress, and he wasn't the type to accept refusal gracefully. When he started showing up at my boarding house, making it clear he'd buy my compliance one way or another, I knew I had to leave. The advertisement seemed like providence, a chance to disappear where he'd never think to look. And you jumped from the frying pan straight into Walsh's fire, Slate observed grimly. This territory's got plenty of men like him, ma'am. Predators who see women as commodities to be bought and sold. You'll need to be careful. I'm always careful, Sarah said quietly. It's kept me alive this long. They rode on as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Slate pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, a dry wash where flash floods could trap the unwary, a distant line of cottonwoods marking a seasonal creek. He spoke matter-of-factly, sharing information rather than making conversation, and Sarah appreciated his restraint. Too many men filled silence with empty words, as if their voices needed to dominate every space. As twilight gathered, Slate guided them off the main trail toward a cluster of rocks that offered shelter from the wind and concealment from the road. "We'll camp here tonight," he said, dismounting with fluid ease. "It's not safe to travel after dark, and the horses need rest." Sarah climbed down from Button's back, her legs stiff and aching from hours in the saddle. She'd grown soft in St. Louis, she realized, working indoors and walking city streets. The frontier would demand a different kind of strength, and she'd have to find it quickly or die trying. Slate moved with practiced efficiency, unsaddling the horses and hobbling them where they could graze, gathering deadwood for a fire, setting up a simple camp with the economy of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. Sarah tried to help, but her Eastern skills, embroidery and proper tea service, felt useless in this practical world of survival and self-sufficiency. "Sit," Slate said finally, not unkindly. "You've had a hard day. I'll handle this." Pride warred with exhaustion, and exhaustion won. Sarah sank onto a flat rock near where Slate was building the fire, watching his weathered hands coax flame from flint and steel. In the growing darkness, with sparks rising like fireflies toward the emerging stars, she felt the full weight of her vulnerability settle over her. She was alone in the wilderness with a man she didn't know, gambling everything on the hope that his word was worth more than Walsh's promises. As if sensing her thoughts, Slate looked up from the fire, his face half-shadowed in the flickering light. "I know you got no reason to trust me, Miss Mitchell," he said quietly. "I'm a stranger who showed up at a convenient time, and for all you know, I might be worse than Walsh in my own way. But I want you to understand something. My sister Emma's been through hell and back. She was taken by Comancheros when she was 16, held for 8 months before a cavalry patrol found her. She came back changed, broken in ways that don't show on the surface. It took years before she could stand to have a man near her without flinching." He paused, poking at the fire with a stick, his expression distant. "I wasn't there to protect her. I was off chasing glory and gold, too young and stupid to understand that family mattered more than fortune. When I finally came home and saw what had been done to her, what she'd survived, I made myself a promise. I'd do right by her from then on, and I'd do right by any woman who needed help. Not for gratitude or reward, but because it's what I should have done in the first place." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, moved by the raw honesty in his voice, by the weight of guilt he still carried like stones in his pockets. "What's your given name?" she asked softly. "You know mine, but I only know you as Slate." A faint smile touched his lips. "Matthew. Matthew Slate. But most folks just call me Slate. Been that way so long I barely answer to Matthew anymore." "Matthew's a good name," Sarah said. "Biblical. It means, gift of God." "My mother thought so," Slate replied. Not sure God would agree, given some of the things I've done, but I appreciate the sentiment. They ate a simple meal of hardtack and jerky, washed down with bitter coffee that tasted like liquid earth. It wasn't much, but it filled the hollow ache in Sarah's stomach, gave her strength to face the questions that had been building in her mind since they'd left the trading post. Finally, as the fire burned low and the night sounds of the desert rose around them, she gathered her courage to ask what she most needed to know. "Your sister Emma," she began carefully, "will she welcome my presence? Or will she resent a stranger invading her home?" Slate considered this, his expression thoughtful in the dying firelight. "Emma's lonely," he said finally. "We live 30 miles from the nearest neighbor, and she doesn't leave the ranch much anymore. Can't stand crowds or strangers, mostly keeps to herself and the horses. But she's mentioned more than once how she wishes she had another woman to talk to, someone who could teach her the things our mother never got a chance to show her. She can cook basic meals and mend torn clothes, but she never learned proper needlework or the kinds of skills you Eastern women take for granted." He looked directly at Sarah, and she saw both hope and worry in his eyes. "I won't lie to you, Emma can be difficult. She has nightmares that wake her screaming. Some days she won't speak at all, just goes through the motions like a ghost. But underneath all that pain, there's still the girl I remember, smart and kind and stronger than she knows. If you can be patient with her, if you can see past the broken parts to the person she's trying to become, I think you two might be good for each other." Sarah absorbed this information, understanding now why Slate had intervened at the trading post, why he'd offered employment to a desperate stranger. He wasn't rescuing her out of chivalry or attraction, he was trying to save his sister by giving her something she needed, another woman's companionship, a chance to heal through helping someone else heal. "I understand broken things," Sarah said quietly. "I've been broken myself more times than I can count. Maybe that's exactly what Emma needs, someone who won't pity her or treat her like she's made of glass, someone who knows that surviving is harder than dying." Slate nodded slowly, something like relief crossing his features. "Maybe you're right," he said. "Maybe Providence did bring you to that trading post today, even if it didn't feel providential at the time." He stood and retrieved a bedroll from the packs, spreading it on the ground near the fire. Then he grabbed his own blanket and moved to the opposite side of the camp, putting the fire between them like a barrier. "You sleep there," he said, gesturing to the bedroll. "I'll keep watch first half of the night, then wake you if I need rest. Don't worry, I won't come near you unless there's danger. You have my word." Sarah wanted to protest that she could take first watch, that she didn't need special treatment, but the exhaustion in her bones argued otherwise. She lay down on the bedroll, pulling her shawl tight against the desert's nighttime chill, and stared up at the vast expanse of stars overhead, more stars than she'd ever seen in St. Louis, a wealth of distant light that made her feel both insignificant and strangely comforted. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard Slate's voice, soft and thoughtful in the darkness. "You asked earlier why I'd help you. I've been thinking about that, and I realized there's another reason I didn't mention. This territory takes more than it gives, Miss Mitchell. It grinds people down until there's nothing left but dust and regret. But every so often, someone comes along who deserves better than what fate's dealing them. Maybe by helping you, I'm making a small bet against the territory's cruelty. Maybe I'm proving that not all men out here are like Walsh. Or maybe I'm just tired of watching good people get swallowed by bad circumstances." Sarah wanted to respond, to tell him that his honesty meant more than he could know, that she'd spent so long being suspicious of kindness that she'd almost forgotten how to recognize the genuine article. But sleep pulled her under before she could form the words, dragging her down into dreams of endless roads and distant horizons where the past couldn't follow and the future waited with uncertain promise.